Thank you for joining me this morning. I'm Wendy Carrillo, and this is Knowledge is Power right here on Power 106. You can follow me on Twitter at Wendy Carrillo and get a podcast of this show available on my blog on power106.com. Joining me this morning is LAUSD School Board President Steve Zimmer. We're going to talk about issues impacting students right here in the city of Los Angeles. Welcome to the show, Steve.
It's so great to be here. Thank you.
So, LAUSD, Los Angeles Unified School District, the second largest district in the country following New York. And some have even said that, we could potentially actually be number one just based on the sheer number of students at LAUSD.
Yeah, well, we're certainly the largest unified school district in the country. New York is very decentralized. Lots of students in New York. But here in LA, we have the largest group of students actually that go to one unified school district.
It's really quite incredible. And, I'm learning more about LAUSD and the way that it's structured. You represent a certain district, correct?
I do. I represent pretty much everywhere from East Hollywood to the ocean.
And how many members are there at LAUSD?
So there's 7 school board members, each democratically elected. And we are far and away the largest democratically elected school board in the country, meaning that we have the influence over the largest number of students and families by far. New York, Chicago, they all have school boards or superintendents that are appointed by the mayor.
Oh, I see. So this is actually, those positions are actually elected by the community in which those members represent.
Exactly.
And so what is the purpose of it? So let's say I live in Highland Park and there's a school board race and I go out to vote. What does my representative do for me?
So there are really two levels. I mean, the first is to fight for you. To fight to make sure that your child, your neighbor, your cousin, your niece, your nephew has the best public schools in the nation. And that no matter what the situation that a child may be coming to LAUSD with, that we look at the wisdom and the history and the culture and the brilliance of every child and welcome that child and their family at the schoolhouse door and make sure that public education is the conduit through which dreams can be fulfilled, as has happened through generations, right? Especially as we understand the history of our country and the contribution and the role that immigrant families have played in making sure that we, in shaping this country. And so the way that folks have been able to transcend poverty and be able to transcend racism, to be able to transcend xenophobia, is actually through a free public school system, which is one of the things that differentiates this nation from others. Mm-hmm. And so the first role of your school board is to make sure that public education dreams can be fulfilled. The second role of the school board is really to set policy, and to set policy on a wide range of issues, whether they be labor issues, whether they be things like dress code, whether they be things like curriculum, technology, all of those things. And on that front, our job really is an equity mission, is to make sure that that resources are distributed to the students and the families and the schools that are existing in the most peril, and that we really do, through an equity-based resourcing, begin to play the role of an equalizer once again through public education.
Well, that's definitely quite a bit, and I want to dive deep into some of those issues that you've actually brought up. Sure. I'm a proud LAUSD graduate.
Excellent.
All of the East Side schools, all of the East LA schools, yeah. Roosevelt High School, which has been called in the past in documentaries dropout factory. Mm-hmm. And, we have a lot of that very bad reputation of students just not graduating. Yeah. What is the current graduation rate in LAUSD?
So the current graduation rate is about 74%, and that's a 4-year cohort average, meaning if you enter in fall semester as a ninth grader, 74% right now of our students are graduating within those 4 years. And, that's not good enough. It's not even close. It's a lot different from 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, when we were graduating around 50% of our students.
Wow.
And people were in kind of the old system, if you would. And I don't just mean the school system. I mean our whole kind of systemically biased and systemically racist systems. Everyone was kind of, I don't want to say okay with it, but it was accepted. And there was a real deficit mindset around English learners, around immigrant families, around students of color. And the work of both elected leaders across the board and leaders in the school district over the last decade has really tried to change that. And there's been a lot of movements in the community that I think have kind of galvanized that change, kind of going from, the 1960s at Roosevelt High School with the blowouts and the Chicano moratorium to, jump forward 30 years from that when you had a tremendous amount of organizing to get schools built all across Los Angeles in our communities of the most poverty and the most economic and racial segregation. Then there was a incredible and important movement around what's called the A through G, making sure that every student has access to a college preparatory curriculum. Mm-hmm. And so these are some of the movements, and now there's an extraordinary movement around what we call restorative practice and stopping suspensions and stopping expulsions, and instead having restorative practice be the approach to how we manage the school climate in every school site. These have been real social movements that have galvanized school leadership and elected officials like myself to really get involved and to really make sure that we are, even in elected office, always conscious of our role as community organizers and as change agents.
I don't think I've ever heard an LAUSD school board member call themselves a community organizer, but I think that's incredibly powerful. My guest this morning is LAUSD School Board President Steve Zimmer. I'm Wendy Carrillo. This is Knowledge is Power right here on Power 106. I want to share a story with you, President Zimmer, and that is when I was at Roosevelt, I got into like the party scene and I started acting, just like a dumb 11th grader that didn't know any better. And I started ditching. And because I started ditching and I started ditching first period, I got automatically suspended and expelled without me even knowing that had happened. And so I was disenrolled out of my high school. And just like that, I was a dropout. And it took a very proactive Principal Ronquillo, who's no longer there, to.
But he's still very involved. I mean,
right.
Ronquillo is a legend. Yeah.
Well, he saved my education. He actually was very involved and got me back in school and got me like back on the right track. And I was able to graduate with my class and on time. And I wonder, like, if that hadn't happened, or because I was an active student and he saw that I was missing, how many students are invisible and don't have that or didn't have that and just became stereotypes out of a system that doesn't care for them.
That's right. Well, so that's exactly what we're in the business of trying to change. And let me tell you that, your 11th grade experience mirrors my 10th grade experience. And a lot of us, I don't think that you were a dumb 11th grader. I think that you were an adolescent, and part of adolescence is messing up. I know the parents who are listening don't like to hear that, but that is, I spent 20 years of my life just completely immersed in adolescence as a teacher, as a counselor, as a coordinator, and that is part of growing. In situations of affluence and privilege, there's a lot more room to make mistakes. And unfortunately, what our students who are living really on the edge a lot of times, on the edge of economic survival, on the edge of a society that still doesn't equitably value their potential and their dreams, there's a lot less room to make the normative mistakes of adolescence or just growing up. And what we have tried to do is, again, transform that system. And so the first and the most important thing that we had to do, and this happened very soon after I was elected to the school board, is we needed to decriminalize truancy. The idea that truancy was somehow a criminal problem, we were giving somewhere around like 14,000 truancy tickets a year. Number one, it was the completely wrong mindset to address students who are having real problems.
And the parents would have to pay those tickets, right? There was like a financial attachment to that ticket.
Oh yes, I mean there was all, and for the majority of those students, that was their first contact with the criminal justice system, and so so we had to end that, and so we no longer issue truancy tickets. The LA School Police does not issue truancy tickets. LAPD does not issue truancy tickets. LA County Sheriff's Department does not issue truancy tickets. You can still get a citation for truancy if you are caught in another act while you are supposed to be at school. But a standalone truancy ticket just does not exist anymore.
I see.
And then we had to put in an approach where we were really looking at this as a family system, community system, school system problem rather than a student problem. And so we've put in place all types of wraparound services to really address, the root issues of why students go to school. There are not a lot of things that I know to be absolutely true. But after working on this issue for the better part of 20 years, I can tell you, I've never met a student who is chronically truant that didn't first have a significant absence in their own life way before they ever missed their first day of school.
Absolutely.
So if we put that, if again we operate from an asset-based mindset rather than a deficit-based mindset as we approach our students, then the answer is more intervention, more services, and especially, just asking, and this is one of the key elements of trauma-informed pedagogy, not what's wrong with you, but what's happened. What's happened? And why are, and why is it that you've left school or that you're not coming? And so the approach, even in the language, is not accusatory, is not punitive, but restorative and supportive.
There's so many things that young adults, especially in low-income communities, whether it's like the East Side or South LA, they're growing up with trauma.
Yes.
And it's a hard thing to, accept. I know that depression is something else that is not talked about in several communities of color. And so I want to deal with three things. I want to talk about three things with you right now. And my guest this morning is LAUSD School Board President Steve Zimmer. One is the issue of Black Lives Matter and students' interaction with police. A lot of the young people that we've seen in news in the past few years have been young adults and students. The second issue is immigration and the resolution that LAUSD just passed to not allow customs enforcement into LAUSD schools.
Yep.
And lastly is parent engagement. And so with all these social issues going on, and obviously impacted by policy, what can parents do to become more engaged and empower themselves as well as their kids while they're pursuing education? So first, let's go into Black Lives Matter. What is LAUSD doing, or how is this conversation happening, if at all?
Well, I think the first thing that we all have to say, and especially those of us who are the beneficiaries of privilege and entitlement is we have to say loudly and regularly and publicly that Black Lives Matter, and acknowledge our own our own role indirectly and directly, whether in our own personal lives or in our public lives, in maintaining systems that have created a necessity for that hashtag and for that movement. And until there's like a public accounting and a personal accounting for all of us, we're never going to have the we're never going to have the essential conversations that we need to have about race, systemic racism, and direct racism that still exists in our schools, in our communities, on our streets, and throughout all of our systems. As it specifically relates to law enforcement, we deal with very complicated issues, and we are trying internally to work with who I believe is a very progressive school police chief to really reform our school police practices. Are we challenged with balancing that desire to change a system, the necessity to change a system, with the dueling necessity of making sure children are safe every day to and from school in their passage, as well as on campus? Yes. Are those hard questions? Absolutely. Do we need to engage everybody in getting to the right answers? Absolutely. Your next question on immigration, this one to me is just something that has changed my life. I don't think of myself, I didn't think of myself as second generation. But my grandparents either were each of them were either the first born here or arrived here in infancy. Mm-hmm. And
from where, Steve?
From Eastern Europe, running from the pogroms and the violence against Jews throughout Eastern Europe in the first part of the last century, and they, each of them, lived in extreme poverty. Each of them were monolingual Yiddish speakers, and so when I became an ESL teacher right out of college, it was a life-changing experience for me, not only in having the incredible privilege of an honor of working with our recent immigrant families in the 1990s during a time of absolute assault on immigrant families and communities, but also connected me to who I was and who I am, and my own family and their own experience, and the role that public education played in having my family overcome situations of extreme poverty, anti-Semitism, and gain stability in this country. And so when I was able to sponsor a resolution, and we've done many things in terms of Dreamers, DACA, opening up our schools, opening up our resources to make sure that the Dreamers have every opportunity that every student has. And when this latest round of hate and vitriol started, and the Obama administration, inexplicably to me, and in what I believe is direct contradictions to the values that I think our president holds, expanded these raids. It was like breathing, that we would open up our schools and make sure that our schools were safe places for all families, and that we were accelerating our coordination with the immigrant rights community to make sure that all of our kids and all of their families are safe from a government that should be welcoming them instead of treating them as criminals.
Right. So a mother that's dropping off her young daughter at school shouldn't fear that ICE is nearby. A student that's walking to school with their backpack and friends shouldn't fear that ICE is going to pick them up and label them, or just by what they look like.
And if they do fear that, they should go into their school site and tell someone immediately, and know that their school system and their school are their allies and are their supporters in this moment and in this situation that they're in.
They should feel safe.
They should feel safe, and I want to know if any child does not feel safe in any of our schools.
And lastly, the question was about empowerment. So as there are many, like I, for one, was a student that often translated for my parents before my parents learned English.
Sure.
And I know that there's a lot of students that do that. So they grow up very, very early. In elementary, you have a third grader translating. So what are some of the resources that parents have, or what can they do to become more engaged in the process and empower themselves and the students? What are their rights?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, the first thing is that we look at parents not as subordinate, but as partners. And I feel we have come a long way, and we have a longer way to go in making sure that every parent is welcome in terms of their rights as the first educators and as the most important educators in a child's life. We've greatly expanded parent centers. There is an increased opportunity through the LCFF and the LCAP, the state funding system, for parents to be directly involved in the decision-making process around budgeting, around the selection of principals, and even the selection of teachers. So there's a tremendous opportunity for parents and for students to be involved, but we always need to do more. It is a system, and it's a system that's not always responsive enough and not always progressive enough in terms of the proper distribution of power and decision-making. And so the most important thing, or one of the most important things about having a democratically elected school board, is that parents get to hold us accountable. Students get to hold us accountable to making sure that the things I say on the radio or the things I talk about when I speak to parents or I speak to students actually translate into policy, actually translate into experiences on the ground. And that's one of the great dangers when folks talk about either eliminating or eviscerating the powers of a democratically elected school board. We are and we need to be accountable. And whether it relates to parent empowerment, student empowerment, or really, the changes in our system that remain a long way from reality, it's our job to be accountable to our values, but most importantly, to the hopes and dreams of our children and their families. And as long as we do have democracy as it relates to our schools, there is the possibility of doing that.
My guest this morning has been LAUSD School Board President Steve Zimmer. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us this morning. It's been great to talk to you, and I appreciate you doing this. And you can actually follow LAUSD School Board President Steve Zimmer on his account, and it's LAUSD_Zimmer. And for more information on getting to know your school board member and attending a school board meeting, simply go to LAUSD.net. I'm Wendy Carrillo, and this is Knowledge is Power right here on Power 106. You can follow me on Twitter at Wendy Carrillo, and let me know what you think.